My name is Jerron Jones. I am a third-year student at Bellarmine University. I'm in the higher education program with an emphasis in sports. So hopefully going to school to be an athletic director one day, or somehow be in the administrative field. Right now we have a class assignment where we're supposed to identify professional ethic or social justice issue in the community or globally. So I went in my own backyard and got one of my good guys, Shelton McElroy, to tell his story about racial profiling and the ethical principles of law enforcement. Shelton and I, we go way back, man. We actually met in the year of 2008 or 9 in the grad school program at Lindsey Wilson. It's a guy that I instantly connected with. He was one of those persons, you know, when he came in the classroom, whether he was on time or late, when he spoke up, you always listen. I mean, he has a really good charisma about him. He's a pretty, you know, concrete talker, so pretty much everything he says is for a purpose and it makes sense. And so once I graduated, we've always kept in touch, just to kind of, you know, touch bases with family, what's going on in the community. We also connect because he's always in the community. I mean, works nonstop, really about the advocacy for, you know, equality and equity. So it's a guy that we just create positive vibes, you know, no matter what we miss 6 months talking to each other or a year. Whenever we do connect, it's like no time lost. So it's a guy that I look up to, a guy that I can, you know, have a conversation and it means something.
I'm Shelton McElroy. I work in the community here in Louisville, doing various community organizing work, from foster youth and helping them to have better outcomes out of the system, to helping families with early childhood development, working primarily in Beecher Terrace and Park Hill neighborhood, helping to connect those families to early childhood development resources. And then the way I met Jerron, me and Jerron both Lindsey Wilson School of Professional Counseling graduates. Jerron was 2 years ahead of me, and it was just good and refreshing to see him and another brother in the program. You know, the program comes from out of Columbia, Kentucky, so it's a very rural, private, religious-based school, and so it was good to see brothers in that program picking up the skills of mental health counseling. Ever since meeting Jerron and just watching how he culturally intertwines his own flair to the counseling dynamic, as well as to all the work that he does in the community, you know, being a DJ, but also just always having his radar up as to how to create opportunity and change for the community and for people. So that's how we met. It's been a real good relationship. Like you mentioned, you know, whether we see each other a week from now or 6 months from now, it's like we just left each other yesterday. And so when I get the opportunity to be connected with Jerron through his program at Bellarmine, I actually was one of the people that was encouraging him, because I was looking at the program and just still haven't found my way into settling things down and breaching it. But he's inspiration every day, man, that he continues to push forth. It's not easy for a father, African-American man, to go into higher education and get their PhD. I think we're probably less than 1% those that do, and those that are even aspiring to, in our community. And so if I can do anything to assist and be of service, and so, you know, having this opportunity to talk about discrimination in our city and community in Louisville. So the question of racial profiling and ethical principles of policing, and my own personal experience of kind of all those forces coming down on me and landing my body into incarceration happened 2013, October. So coming up on 4 years ago, So that part about the ethical principles of the police, I want you to hold on to that part, and we're going to get to that. But we're going to talk about, firstly, to answer that question, about an institution that made its money off of white flight. So Cordish Corporation, who moved here to Louisville to build 4th Street Live in an area that was a commercial area that black people majority shopped. So this was formerly the Galleria. It was a well-known establishment where black people came frequently, and the whole entire corridor of 4th Street was. So our city has been known for, take Old Walnut Street, for example, for cordoning off areas and siphoning and stopping black success, black wealth. They did it with the cruising of Derby, and how that 1 week out of the year would produce tons of revenue for African-American business owners up and down Broadway. And they stopped that, and they closed that Walnut Street. And then the Galleria was this area right here where we sit, right next to the Center for Interfaith Relations, that black folk frequented, and so with the emergence of this new revitalization of the downtown area, you had a corporation called Cordish, who was known for going into cities. We're not the only city that has kind of low investment in the inner city, and then you had all of these cities where wealthy investors had pretty much plundered the suburbs and couldn't go any farther without going into other counties, and said, okay, let's come back in and let's re-emerge the downtown area. And so Cordish comes in and they build this restaurant, multiplex, entertainment venue, and the city of Louisville deems it the living room of Louisville, and says, if it's the living room of Louisville, if we have a championship team, if Louisville does anything major, let's come to the living room of Louisville and let's celebrate. Only problem is us, you, Jerron, in your Adidas pants and your Adidas shoes, you, my friend, with your new little hat and your Vans shoes, your hoodie, me in my black, none of us dressed as we are would be allowed in what was deemed the living room of Louisville. And there was intentionality around that. They wanted to create a homogeneous environment that beckoned throughout the state of Kentucky and said, hey, come have fun here, celebrate here, and here is where you're welcome, where this is actually created for you by you. And it wasn't for us. It wasn't for African Americans, black men specifically in the age group of 18 to 35. We were completely excluded. And so you couldn't put up a sign and say, no young black men. But what you could do is you could say, well, what are young black men wearing? Let's discriminate based on what they're wearing. We'll just, and even when they're wearing exactly the same thing as young white men, we'll still stop them and say, your shirt is too long. Your polo logo is not allowed. Your jeans are loose. Your hat is on. And we'll still keep their numbers at such a minimal that this homogeneous community feels very comfortable. So to connect my experience and how I came into conflict with the ethical principles of the police, I come here, me and some of my colleagues from JCTC where I was teaching, to have an evening just listening to music, talking amongst each other. At this time, 4th Street had about 4 to 5 suits and claims of discrimination, and had came to some agreements about not discriminating against people by their clothes. And so the policies had specifically changed. Well, that night when I came in, I get to one of the clubs called Sully's. I pay my $10 to get in the door. The manager, the bouncer, the female hostess, they're all standing right there at the door. I pay my money, show my ID, I walk in. I'm in for like 5 minutes. The DJ doesn't have any shirt on. There's 3 gentlemen standing on top of the bar with the female bartender pouring liquor into their mouth. They're completely shirtless. And the same bouncer that I had walked past going in, he walks up to me and says, "Come with me." Well, immediately, I don't know what's going on. I'm like, so I just walk with him. I'm like, what's going on? When we get to the front door, he's like, "You out of dress code, you gotta leave." I'm like, out of dress code? So I pull out my phone. I'm like, what do you mean I'm out of dress code? And so I start taping video immediately, because I'm like, I know what this is. What do you mean I'm out of dress code? It's grown men, completely bare-chested, naked. And I'm out of dress code? What, I gotta take off my clothes? Is that the dress code in here? I thought this was Sully's. I didn't know this was Colors or some other type of joint. So anyway, he says, yeah, you out of dress code, you gotta go. So I said, all right, man, I'll leave. Let me get my refund. And the manager's standing here at the time. I said, look, man, the man's trying to tell me I'm out of dress code. I got the same clothes that I walked in with, that I paid my $10 just 5 minutes ago. I said, let me get my refund, man. I'll go ahead and leave. I know what y'all doing. And the manager said, no refund. I said, no, I ain't going nowhere. And so the bouncer, he does a signal like this to the police officer. Now this is where it really questions the ethical principles of the police force. This police officer is in full police regalia. However, he's not being paid by the police. He's being paid by the owners of the establishment to enforce this discriminatory practice, because they don't want black people that look like me from my culture in their establishment. And they're using his complete official stance to enforce that goal. And so he walks over there. He never asked me a question, Jerron. He literally reaches over and grabs me on the shoulder. I'm like, what is going on? Like, you would imagine that in a case of a dispute between you and myself, if we pull the police over, they're a neutral party. They want to listen to your side, my side, and try to mitigate. He never once does that, because he's being paid by one side. Grabs my shoulder. I said, man, what are you doing? Unhand me. I said, man, I paid money to get in here. I ain't been in here 5 minutes. I got the same clothes I walked in on. They trying to tell me I'm out of dress code. He says, you gotta leave or I'm gonna lock you up. I said, lock me up? Lock me up? All right, go ahead, lock me up. Lock me up. What you gonna lock me up for? And so I'm laying on the ground right in front of the establishment. People walking by looking like, damn, what's he doing to his brother? And so it threw him off. It threw him off because he was so used to enforcing his power and just people adhering to it. But by me questioning his authority and standing up the way I did for myself, he overreacted. He arrested me, put me in handcuffs, drugged me right out here on this same street that we're standing on, took me right to the back, and a whole gang of them surrounded me with this threatening, intimidating force as if they would beat my ass if I said anything. Pushed me in the car. He's driving me to the police department to arrest me. Arrest me for what? I don't know what he's charged me for. And he's like, you should have just came back the next day and got your money. Come back the next day? Are you serious? You really think that was right? I walked in with the same clothes, so we having this back and forth conversation. Well, you don't know, they would have probably gave you your money the next day. So I go to jail. At the time, I'm working on my master's degree. I'm in an internship at JDAC. All right, I get out of jail the following morning. That night while I'm in jail with people who, in my internship, I had a responsibility of administering urinalysis to guys that were recently released from prison that were doing a substance abuse program. So here I'm sitting in jail, and cats that I done had to supervise and turn in their dirty drug screens are incarcerated with me. They looking at me, I'm looking at them. So I'm in a hostile environment. I get out of jail, I go to work at JDAC. They said they got a policy where you can't be in a direct supervision role of people that are recently released while having a pending charge. So I lost that job. I lost that internship. My face was splattered all in the crime times. And so, you know, just this unchecked authority that the police officer had, in which he was paid to do a job and was able to take official powers and reap and enforce the whole entire weight of the police force down on me to separate me from the community, from my freedom in just an instant, based on a discriminatory policy by an institution.
Hi, how you doing? You're sagging.
He got you leave. Don't let step out here.
Tells me that I gotta leave?
Look, step out here.
I'm talking about I paid for this shit?
Get my good side if you're gonna do it. Get my good side.
Step out here, I'll talk to you before you lock you up. I'm gonna lock you up.
Okay,
Step out here.
arrest me. Arrest me. What are you arresting me for? Get your hands off of me. What are you arresting me for? What are you arresting me for? What are you... You can't have my phone.
I'm trying to put you in handcuffs right now. You're about to resist.
So the question about bridging the gap between law enforcement and African American communities, and specifically African American men, is there a remedy for that, or is it just destined and woven within the DNA of policing and policing in America? So my sister was the first African American female state trooper in the state of Kentucky. And I'll briefly tell you that while she was located in eastern Kentucky, she was sent out on a call. There was a well-known Caucasian man who was a troublemaker. And she was sent out on this call to, you know, he was causing trouble, go out there, pick him up, bring him in. She gets out there, this guy's about 6'6", 350 pounds. Drunk, wanting to fight. So my sister pulls up at the scene and, you know, she assesses it and realizes that, you know, dude's not gonna go with me, I need backup. Her white counterparts did not respond to her call for backup. They refused to come out and back her up. And eventually she just pulled off and left. And so my counter question, what would you have imagined would have happened had she have shot and killed him? And that was the dilemma, because she physically could not restrain him alone, maybe not even any one police officer, and they much knew that, but yet they sent her out there. And so I say that just because I wanted to really just unpack what race means in the space of this conversation, and it supersedes policing. Race supersedes policing. Policing was founded off the premise of capturing runaway slaves. That was the foundation of policing, and protecting the aristocrats and the landowners' property. And so out of those roots, policing has sprung. Now, what I will say about this conversation about policing that we continue to have in policing reform is that we do not live in a communist regime. We, meaning we, the people that vote, we, the people that create policy, we, the practitioners, we as a community decide the way we want our police to operate and respond. And a part of us have decided, a majority of us have decided that it's okay for the police to mistreat the underbelly of America's society. And unfortunately for those of us that are black males, but we find ourselves as that underbelly. And so the majority has decided that police can do as they choose and have the power of life and death in utilizing and enforcing society's wishes in how they curtail the underbelly of society, and that includes us black men. So the question about body cameras, police reform, is there a way in which we can all get along, is a question that's deeply rooted in the fabric of America's history. Black bodies, black male bodies, are the blood that is mixed in the soil that created the foundations, the highways, the White House, the Capitol Rotunda of Frankfurt. Everything is built off of black bodies. And so black bodies, it's tradition for white people to destroy the black body. And so the police are simply carrying out the whims of that tradition. So in order for us to anyway have a real dialogue and a real conversation and real reform, we have to really unpack the historical context. We have to go to the root cause of the discrepancies and the different outcomes in black life versus white life. See, black life versus white life did not just start after the civil rights era. We have to go back to the Middle Passage, and we have to see and rectify the wrongs via reparations. The question about my attitude toward white police officers and whether or not I patronize 4th Street Live, and some details about the current litigation. First of all, white police officers, black police officers, Latino ex-police officers, there's no delineation between any of those. The system of policing is a system that if you are a black officer and you pull up, you have to enforce this system on black, brown, white, anybody. So it's not a specific color of the officer. The system of policing is set up focused on black bodies. We disproportionately are represented in prison. We're disproportionately represented in any of the negative outcomes in accessing police, whether it's death via police officer, whether it's parking tickets, speeding tickets. The plunder of Ferguson did not start after Michael Brown was killed. They were plundering the residents of Ferguson via the municipalities of their court system and their police system. And that isn't specific to a black officer, a white officer, or any other color officer. It's a system of policing. So I don't have a problem with the individual human beings that wear those badges and wear those uniforms. I have a problem when those individuals are in such blatant denial, right? When we watch police officers shoot and kill a man in South Carolina, walk over, drop his taser, and pretend that the man was gonna assault him, and the police officers come out and rank and file unifiedly deny that this stuff happens, right? So that's what I have a problem with, and that is across the board with police. I have a lot of conversations with police. I do a lot of conversations around police brutality, and every single one of those conversations, I'm pitted across from a police officer, and that police officer is holding the system in complete objectionable denial. He is never once going to acknowledge the fallacies of that police force. And that, my friend, is a problem. Now, when you speak about 4th Street Live and what about this area do I utilize? So I'll say first off, short answer is no, I don't. But it's a bigger answer, a bigger question. This corridor is where Dr. Blaine Hudson and many civil rights fighters struggled so that we could have access to these stores up and down through here. My mother, her mother, when she would take her shopping, would have to go to the back in order to access clothing from these shops. Muhammad Ali is said to have gone to a diner on this same street, 4th Street, and been denied service after boxing and winning a gold medal in the Olympics, and walking right down to the river at 4th and throwing his gold medal into the river. So the question about whether I use this space in this conversation seems like it's exclusive to this space, but my laying down and fight for civil rights was not exclusive to this space. It was really a larger cry of Black Lives Matter universally throughout Louisville, and was a question of, do I have to die for you to pay attention to our struggle, or can you pay attention to the struggle when it relates to simply having access to what we've called our living room? So it's a larger conversation, and no, I don't use 4th Street Live. I don't have a problem with some of the shops in 4th Street Live. I don't have a problem with other people, my daughter, anybody wants to, because on the larger scale, we have a whole entire community west of us that has been disenfranchised, no investment, intentional policy that has put poor people on top of poor people on top of poor people, built housing projects, and created violent communities, because poverty is the father of violence. And those policies come out of Metro Council, they come out of the mayor's office, they come out of the business community, Greater Louisville Inc., so forth and so on. So that's who I have a larger problem with, and that's what the incident I have is a microcosm of an entire community that has been destitute based on disenfranchisement by the establishment. The question about how this incident has affected my advocacy, my activism, as well as the current pending civil case that I have in court. So I'll tell you, Cordish nationally has had numerous cases of discrimination, and they, in their coffers are millions and millions of dollars, and so they generally beat those cases not by merit but by technicality. Right now, they're pushing for some technicalities against our case that they would hope to have the judge throw the case out. So it's one of those things where, you know, they have the money, man. They have the legislation, they have the policymakers. Cordish, Reed Cordish, who is one of the foremost investors in this project and lead people who had created the policy around discriminating against Black people, is now in the Trump administration. So when Trump became president, he appointed Reed Cordish to his administration. And so they just let you know kind of how the power, and so then when we land in front of a federal judge, you might also know that Trump appoints federal judges throughout the state of Kentucky and throughout the nation. And so just you know, whatever you make of that as far as the pending litigation, I'll leave it at that for you to. So my activism, my advocacy, I think it definitely has strengthened. I've built a lot of relationships out of this. One of the most powerful pieces I believe that came out of this was when I was going to court for the criminal charges of trespassing and disorderly conduct. A whole entire community of activists surrounded me. I had a professor from University of Louisville, Elizabeth Jones, pro bono, become my attorney. I had groups like Kentucky Alliance for Racism and Political Oppression, L-Surge, which is a white group that fights against racism, and multiple groups of people all unify and rally around me. So I would go to court, and at court, I'm fighting these misdemeanors, and in the court with me would be 15, 20, sometimes 25 people surrounding me. And so in my activism growing out of that experience, I got to do some traveling and some training with this group out of Cali called Debug. And right now we're in the process of creating this space once a week that meets called participatory defense. And once a week, participatory defense will meet, and anybody who has a loved one who's come into contact with the legal system can come to a participatory defense meeting. And at the participatory defense meeting, we're taking the community organizing principle, the principles that you use in community organizing to stop people from opening pollutants in your community or whatever you use that principle for. We're using that principle against the legal system. So if a mom has a son who's incarcerated for whatever kind of trumped up charges, she could come to the participatory defense meeting and we would rally around her and use organizing principles to help her in fighting for freedom and justice for her son and for her child. So that's kind of how this has catapulted me into my activism, and we'll be coming 100% online the first week of November with participatory defense. We'll meet once a week. We'll take referrals from the public defender's offices as well as from courts via word of mouth. People will show up at the space, and it's like when they have a loved one on the phone calling them and saying, hey, if you go and do this and talk to this person, and can you go and tell my job to write a letter? Well, we're gonna be creating social bios. We're gonna be helping families, helping loved ones to advocate on behalf of their loved ones in the court system. And hopefully we're gonna really affect change in the legal system and bring justice within that system.